Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of The Working Ant with me, your host and coach, Rami Balut. What a pleasure it remains to be a part of your journey. I hope that wherever you are and whatever you're doing while listening to this, you're in good health above all else. You're in high spirits and you're feeling excited and enlivened about the future. It remains such a pleasure to be with you every single week here on the Working Ant, and today we're going to be talking about something quite special, and we're going to try to go into a little bit of like the deep end side of things and how we view ourselves and who it is that we actually are. In the professional realm of things, but obviously, this very much impacts many of you on the personal front as well. Last week, I absolutely loved the feedback that I received from you. If you had reached out to me, talking through some of these deeper questions I'm asking around, is this just still the beginning, or is it actually near the end of something? And we got a lot of responses from that, a lot of action as a result of it. And I obviously couldn't be happier to hear that. And today, we're going to be talking about something that sort of anchors off of that, but into something more existential and more fundamental. And that is, imagine who it is you actually are, who it is you would be if you did not have the need to please. And, or in many cases, just make an impression, sustain that impression over a long period of time. And I think this is sort of a question where most of us really fail to respond to, mainly because it actually throws most things up in the air as to like the perception we've built for ourselves, the persona, the brand, the identity we've built with ourselves over the years. And it calls a lot of that into question because, many of times when we're feeling fatigued, when we're feeling that we actually don't have much to contribute, when we feel like we're having an identity crisis of some sort, and we really want to feel like, we should emphasize the opportunities for us to recreate ourselves and reinvent ourselves. Oftentimes, this becomes a very large challenge for us. And that's primarily because the effort it actually takes to maintain this persona of ourselves that we have worked on for, a fairly large amount of time over the course of our professional careers seems to misalign itself at times with who we are in that room. And what I mean by that is, if you found yourself, in a conference room, in a meeting, with individuals, with leaders, with your manager, with your peers, whomever they may be, where you've struggled to participate, and you may have even struggled to listen to what's really going on and comprehend what's going on, and you've really made an effort to do so, and yet you found yourself in a position where you may not necessarily feel that you are able to contribute in a meaningful and valuable and impactful way. Oftentimes, this is just a result of, our inability to restore so much of who it is that we are with what it is that we are set to do professionally, the services we were actually paid for, the scope of work we're actually compensated for, who it is that we are and what it is that we represent in an organization. And oftentimes this becomes a part of our incessant need to please, the energy we put in to promoting and preserving a persona of professionalism that may or may not actually be aligned to us anymore, leaves us fatigued. It leaves us in many ways feeling like we are inept in some way. Our self-efficacy sort of takes a nosedive, and we're sort of struggling on how to cope with this sort of feeling of an existential crisis of some sort. And this could be a temporary thing. That could be just a moment of the day, could last a little bit longer throughout the week, and it may be something that you've been carrying with you for a long period of time. But, going back to asking yourself this, I would say, fundamental and existential question is, who would you actually be if you did not have the pressure to promote an identity or an impression of yourself in general? Just period. Stop right there. Who would you actually be? What kind of person would you be? And I want you to just take this moment to actually ask yourself that question. Who would you be if you did not have to put so much pressure on yourself to be making an impression or sustaining an impression or a persona and a perception of yourself over the course of time? Who would you be in this exact moment? Would you be that kind and curious person? Would you be that energetic and enlivened person? Would you actually remove the barriers of stress and pressure you put on yourself to perform only because you feel obligated to do so in an environment that is quite uncertain, injected with a level of anxiety, right? The power of bad is still real. At least being here in the Bay Area in California, we hear about layoffs constantly nowadays. Who's going to be next? What's it going to look like for me? I thought my team was safe. No longer is the case. And this is not to promote any power of bad in this conversation. I want to be the last person to do so. But I just sort of want to give you a reality check over what it is you might be feeling at any given part of the day. And, the macroeconomic climate is real. The global economic climate is real. These are things that are actually affecting us every single day when we're reading the news. At least there's no shortage of that here in the United States. But here it's really a matter of the restoration of your identity. I want to make sure you get that clear. This is about the restoration of your identity. And I'm not talking about the restoration of your identity in a spiritual sense, although that's a wonderful thing, and you can go on your spiritual journey and push for a lot of that. And I think that's absolutely a wonderful thing. But this is more of the restoration of your identity of like who it is you are at your core, right? Instead of like thinking about like, okay, how is it that I actually hear things? How do I listen to things? How do I interpret things? How do I observe things, right? If I think about how I think, what kind of patterns do I typically put together? Right? What sort of conclusions do I actually come to when I'm processing a good amount of information? And when I'm conducting myself in day-to-day activities, what are sort of the outcomes that I actually produce? Not the outputs, but what are the outcomes that I actually produce? And what sort of benefits anchor off of those outcomes for those that interact with me, for those that receive artifacts, deliverables, presentations, documentation, whatever they may be, any reporting, any sort of dashboards, whatever it is in whatever industry you're actually in. What are some of the outcomes of that? What are some of the benefits of that? And I'm not talking about the benefits that your role obliges you to push and promote. I'm talking about the benefits of producing an identity of yourself that is aligned, that is authentic, that is something that is sustainable. Oftentimes when people approach me for interviews or developing someone's, rebranding, reinventing themselves for a particular transition or a particular growth opportunity, we're really thinking through how can we distinguish ourselves amongst a sea of other people vying for a particular position? How can we distinguish ourselves amongst a group of other individuals that are also vying for a particular, evaluation of some sort, right? We want to be able to clearly distinguish ourselves and clearly make it in a very, very compelling way so that, we feel like we're on the right path of growth of some sort, right? We may be getting a promotion sometime soon or putting ourselves up for promotion sometime soon. We may be going through a period of where our compensation is being reevaluated. The sort of range of our compensation is now obviously up for debate on whether or not we should continue and sustain of where we're at, or we should actually be at a path of further growth. And all these things, what they do is they put a level of demand and stress on ourselves. And oftentimes that demand and stress on ourselves removes us from this bridge of identity within ourselves. And it becomes really taxing on us to be able to promote that identity and preserve that identity over a period of time. And so what I want us to consider today, at least, is, if you were to remove this pressure of trying to excite somebody, impress upon somebody, promote a perception of yourself, create this impression of yourself, whether it's at first glance, first opportunity, or whether it's the preservation of that through ongoing and recurring meetings, I want you to be able to disassociate yourself with that pressure and think through, who would I actually be at my core? What are some of these great things about myself that I seem to have, not necessarily lost along the way, but sort of like forgotten along the path a little bit. There's a little bit of a bridge there to it, but I may have to go back and try to reevaluate, hey, what are those things that make me who it is that I am? And how can I actually build on those things? And the reason why this is so important is because, if we're really looking to distinguish ourselves, right? If we're really looking to invest in our self and personal development, and by the way, what a great time this is to actually do that. When there's so much going on in this world, I feel like this is like the absolute perfect time to take a step back and ask yourself, who the hell am I? And what kind of a person would I actually be if I didn't actually have to go through all these whims and woes of pressure to preserve this persona that I've built upon myself? And oftentimes it's very, very challenging. Some of us may think like, hey, you know what? I just started a new job. The pressure is super real there. I've got to go through at least 6 to 8 months, maybe a year of really pushing out this persona of myself before I can relax a little bit and say like, okay, I can coast for a little bit now. I can feel pretty good about like where I've built myself up to be. And so I can like relax the reins of putting this pressure on myself. Others, we may have been in a career for quite some time now. And we're like, all right now is not the time for us to continue to conduct ourselves in the way we once have done before. Maybe now it's actually up to us to maybe be a bit more of a generalist now and feeling like, hey, how can I put myself in a position where I can make some strategic decisions rather than doing the work itself? And there are others that are actually in, mid-career, thinking through like, okay, where do I go from here? I've been doing this for years now. Is this the path that I want to continue to pursue? Or should I actually start considering making a transition, thinking through some opportunities for myself that I never once thought about before? Is this the opportunity for me right now? Is this the right time to make a change, to take a risk on myself, to take a chance on myself when I otherwise would not have? And what's going to happen, for example, when I have more responsibility? I have another child on the way. I've got another house to pay mortgage on. Whatever those things are, you will always find that there is just pressure coming in from different directions that sort of allow us to deviate from some of these core existential, foundational, and fundamental identity of ours that sometimes just gets pushed to the side or neglected along the way. And so if we just remove that pressure, even if it's just for a moment, we can restore and rebuild an identity for ourselves that is very much aligned with the principles and values that have evolved to where it is we're at today. And I can't emphasize how important this is because, we're so cooped up and so busy doing so many things that we seem to lose a lot along the way. And what I mean by that is, we seem to lose this level of excitement, level of engagement, level of enthusiasm for the future. And that's as far as I actually want you to be. In fact, what I want you to be able to do is make sure that you've actually restored that bridge between who it is you actually are, like at your core, and build off of that. Don't think for any moment that you wouldn't be able to do that, or there's going to be a significant trade-off for you doing something just like that versus continuing to maintain and sustain an impression of yourself that may not necessarily be aligned with who it is that you actually are. And, oftentimes people approach me like, they've gone through a personal life change. Sometimes their customers have changed. Sometimes their customers have changed. Sometimes, there's an introduction of new technology like ChatGPT and generative AI and new language models where we're like thinking about like, oh my gosh, what is the future of me in all of this? Where am I going to fit in all of this stuff? All of a sudden, a question can be asked with very, very little thought, with very little like back and forth. And there's all these alternatives to consider that may have taken me so long to produce that now are produced like instantaneously. Where do I fit in all of this? And, I'm one to believe that opportunity is created from those that actually have the optics for it. And we've discussed this before in previous episodes. We need to be ready for what's going to be coming next. But we can't be ready for what's coming next if we don't actually reevaluate ourselves. And so, when we have this enormous amount of pressure to please people, to please those that are in our proximity only because we want validation of who it is that we are, we want this level of acceptance. And by the way, in human nature, this is innate. We want acceptance of those that are around us. We want a level of appreciation, recognition, and foundationally and fundamentally an understanding of who it is that we actually are and what we actually bring to the table whenever we're in the room. Even if we have nothing to actually say, our mere presence to be in a room must signify some level of persona, some level of association to perception of this brand that we've built over time. And you know what? That's okay. That's going to happen constantly. But imagine if we actually were to do that with removing the equation of this pressure to please. We get afraid of something like that. We think, about horrors of like, oh my gosh, if I were to remove the pressure to please people, what on earth would happen to me? Would I be found out? Would someone actually find out that I'm not the actual person I promote myself to be? Would I be a different individual showing up today on this table if I were to remove the pressure to please out of all these times and all this year and all this time of putting together something that may or may not be authentic to me? My ask of you is to try it, because I actually fundamentally believe that at your core, you're kind, you're principled, you have good intentions, you actually deeply want to succeed, and you actually want better for yourself. If we're going to do the things that matter and live lives of authenticity, personally and professionally, these are some of the things that we actually have to come face to face with and head to head with. So many of times people would come to me feeling absolutely unpleasant, feeling horrid about their day to day, feeling that they have been depleted of energy. Even those that are in leadership positions feel a level of compassion fatigue. And by the way, compassion fatigue is totally real. And why is that? Our willpower for things that are actually aligned to us are infinite. And yet our willpower for things that we struggle to sustain are finite. Our time is also finite. And so what we must be doing today in order for us to succeed in an uncertain world, in an unpredictable world, and a world where, someone's going to come face to face with us one day and say, we've been doing a lot of preparation. While you may have been on the sidelines, we've been doing a lot of work on ourselves, a lot of promotion of who it is that we are and our identity. And if that identity is stronger, and what I mean by that is if that identity actually has greater conviction, well, we'll find ourselves in even greater trouble. And so what I want you to do is at just one moment of your day today or sometime during the week, remove this pressure, this incessant need to please. And it's not that I don't want you to think through, hey, who it is you're going to be meeting with and what on earth this conversation is going to do for you in the future. But I am one to believe that if you remove this pressure of trying to promote an identity of yourself that may or may not be aligned with who it is that you are, you're risking some really, really beautiful opportunities in the future. There has never been a better time, in my opinion, to go out and understand that what you bring to the table, what you bring to your work, at its core and at its foundation is good. It's productive. And you need to believe that with a strong amount of conviction for yourself, with a strong amount of conviction for your self-efficacy, with a strong amount of belief that who it is you are, and like literally who it is that you are with this identity at its absolute core, is not only a wonderful thing, but it's actually needed in the workplace. If you can go in with this level of conviction and take away this pressure and this stress on your shoulder to compete with others that are headed in the same direction of a system that is built on constant competitiveness, constant like neck to neck sort of, strife, constant incessant needs to produce outcomes. And while doing all that, takes away and removes us from this bridge, this restorative bridge of who it is that we are in our own identity, well, then, it's like I feel truly that we're going to struggle unnecessarily. for things we didn't have to struggle for. So I want to relieve you of that. And I want you to believe that if you were to take away this stress, like this pressure on yourself to be different than who it is that you are, well, look, at minimum, it's going to give you a level of self-awareness over your alignment to your roles and responsibilities today. In essence, what I'm saying is if you discover that these qualities, these innate qualities that you hold today, are actually unable to flourish and flex in your current organization, in your current position, well, then maybe this is a really good time to reconsider where you're headed, the path that you're actually taking. Now, I know you may come and tell me, hey, Rami, I've got so many responsibilities, and I can't go off this beaten path. Well, I'm saying you don't have to do one or the other, but at minimum, have a level of awareness so that when you're in that room again, and there's conversations that come up again where you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not understanding these things. These mouths are moving, but I'm really just not getting the gist of this conversation. People are trying to put in their inputs just because they feel like they actually have to. Well, hey, maybe you have to do the same, and maybe it's expected of you to do so. But my gosh, wouldn't it be amazing if you were to do so with this level of conscious awareness that, you know what, the persona that I'm promoting at this moment may be one that's expected of me, but it sure hell isn't the one that represents me. And if you can have that relationship with yourself, this level of self-awareness with yourself, then the possibilities of your curiosity, the possibilities of your learnings and your growth, they take on a whole new level. We have to relearn our fundamental capabilities because learning truly only happens, real learning, sustainable quality learning, only happens when we've restored our ability to our level of awareness that has been there since the beginning, but has been taken over, hijacked, sometimes polluted, based on this level of social identity that has taken over and hijacked our ability to reconnect with ourselves. And so, look, you don't have to practice this on day one. You don't have to practice this in these core meetings that you simply can't afford to miss out on until you've been fully comfortable with the concept of relieving yourself from this pressure, from this pain, from this stress of being the person that really at your core, you're absolutely just not. You're just not that person. Until that moment, well, at least be aware of how it is you're conducting yourself. And with that, I think there's great power in it as well. So I'm not saying leave behind all this and start anew. If I had my wish and you didn't have these responsibilities and you had to have, an opportunity for yourself at any given point in time to flex and practice all this immediately, well, you know what? We'd probably be singing a different tune and talking a different story here. But at minimum, just be aware of it. And if over time you feel that, hey, I can inject more of who I am through maybe some level of empathy, vulnerability, or private conversation, well, then, your relationships will be deepened. And the relationships that you have in your life determine so much of the quality of your life. And guess what? It's not always with other people here. It actually starts with yourself. You have a great quality relationship with yourself, you're more than likely to have a great quality relationship with other people, and you're more than likely to elevate the quality of your life. And I think a really, really core way of getting closer to do that is, again, relieving yourself of the burden and the pressure and the stress and this incessant need to promote an identity of yourself and a perception of yourself that isn't truly at the core who it is you are. And with that being said, take care of yourself and of each other. And thank you for listening to another episode here on The Working Ant. I'll see you next week. And until then, goodbye.